Holy crap, it's the off-roader, the true SUV, dedicated to off-roading and the best selling in Brazil. Yes, GWM Tank 300 closed out 2025 with 3,500 units sold in the national market. That's not just more, it's much more than a Jeep Wrangler, more than a Jimny Sierra for us to keep competing in the true off-roader segment. More than a Land Rover Defender, and you know what else? More than the entire Land Rover lineup, right? Land Rover sold 3,000 cars in Brazil last year, and the GWM Tank by itself, without even a full year, sold 3,500. And now, in 2026, it's already starting out selling around 400 cars per month. So it should end the year with more than 4,000 cars, right? Maybe close to 5,000. Despite the front end, which really reminds me of those little Russian army jeeps in movies like Rocky IV. It's a very well-designed car visually within this segment, you know, which likes that boxy, tough, rugged look. And it really is a robust and rugged product, right? Even here, look, I can show you. For example, you can clearly see the big chassis, right? It's an SUV, old school, even though I can't stand that term, right? That term originally was cool. That meme, you know, old school versus trendy. Nowadays, almost every time someone uses old school, it's loaded with prejudice. But let's not get too deep into that discussion. But in this category, we're really talking about off-road SUVs, right? With a body-on-frame chassis, with locking differentials, right? It has a central and rear locking differential. It's unbeatable, right? If we want to put it in the same competition, the SW4 sells more, but that's a slightly different proposition. The SW4 is also often bought as a 7-seater car, right? As a big car. And that's something the GWM Tank 300 is not. It's not a particularly spacious car, even though it does have some pretty nice space in the back seat, right? It's a tradition in the Chinese market, by the way. The most protruding running board I've ever seen on a production car. Yeah, if you want to come like this, oh no, you don't need to step up. The car isn't that tall, right? You're going to come here, you're going to twist your knee here or strain your calf. You really have to rely on the running board and get into the car like this, as if it were a truck. Then you come in and sit down, and you enter a very well-finished interior, right? As Chinese brands traditionally do. We're very used to seeing Chinese automakers excel at interior finish. In the range of 200 to 250,000 among the mid-size SUVs, when you come up to this range of 340,000, right? 339,000, which is what the Tank costs. It gives a little upgrade, a step up, right? Really, especially on the doors here, it really reminds you of the G-Class. It has the integration of the screens, right, inside the dashboard, which is something that many times the Chinese are a bit lazy to do. And it has, like I was saying, really hardcore driving modes for off-roading, right, with low range, with here. Look, as you're navigating, you have to select the 4-low mode here first, see? Standard mode, expert mode. You come here, it's really insanely configurable. You have to synchronize it with the transmission. By the way, the gear lever, very much in the Tank style, has the famous tank turn here, see, for you to get out of tight spots on the trail. Although, and then you can watch the video of the launch event. It's on the channel. I'm not even going to start thinking about trying to activate the tank turn here, because I remember it was something like Hadouken back, BA start, it was crazy. Yeah, eco power mode. Look at the amount of stuff. High-speed off-road rally, confirm, that's all I want. And speaking of high-speed off-road rally, which reminds me of the Raptor line from Ford, I think the car that really, when we talk about the real world, competes with the Tank, it's actually the Bronco Sport, which sold 2,600 units last year, right? The numbers are even close. We see that for those who really want a car with a lot of off-road capability, with that adventurous look, and who don't need that much space, right? Because the Bronco Sport is a pretty compact car. It's not that spacious either. The Tank 300 is a big car. It's over 4.7 meters long, right? But as I was showing before, right, I did my step here on the running board. It has a really nice space in the back seat. Let's use the running board. Use it here to support yourself. Real macho stuff, a man's car. I even joked, I'm here with my friend who has a Haval H6, and I said, hey, I showed up with a real man's GWM, the kind with hair on its chest, not that soft Haval H6. But look, really nice space in the back seat, flat floor, right? Look how much room there is here in front of Nono's seat, who brought his big jacket, loves the big jacket here. But you can't have everything in life, right? If you want to have a locking differential body-on-frame construction in a relatively compact car compared to the SW4, to the Pajero Sport, right? A car that's 4 meters and 70 something. So you're going to pay the price here in the trunk, right? It's only 360 liters. Not just because of that, but also because you have the battery down here, right? Which takes up space. So, and also just like in the Wrangler world, etc., right? There's not even the cover here, the speaker box that also takes up some space. And another thing, right? Since on the inside, the Tank 300 is very inspired by the G-Class from Mercedes. And it is in a way a G-Class because how much does a G-Class cost? Over 2 million, right? For about 15% of that. But just like in a G-Class, oh wait, if you need space, I can fold the seat down. You won't do much just folding the seat down, right? I considered bringing the bike here since we're in Guaratuba and the coastline is great for biking. You can't, right? You can't use this seat folding setup for a bicycle. Really, the purpose of this car isn't to be a super family car for those who need a lot of space, but rather to be a very, very, very competent car. Yeah, off-road, I saw it, right? Design flaw. The IAB isn't easy, right? But the IAB is also very poorly fed by content creators and many times even by some rather irresponsible journalists, right? I saw this here. Design flaw in the GWM Tank 300. No, my friend. There's no design flaw at all, right? It was very intentionally designed this way. Plenty of space in the back seat, much better than in a Wrangler, for example. I want good fuel economy, and we'll cover hybrid consumption and range soon. I want to have body-on-frame construction. I want to have a locking differential. Well, a 500-liter trunk I won't have. Oh, but I want a 500-liter trunk. GWM will sell you a Haval H6 with a big trunk with pleasure. And another thing that sets this car apart, right? When we look at this market, and I said this at the launch event, right? That I thought GWM was targeting that buyer. In Defender and Wrangler, and they talked a lot about Pajero Sport, about SW4. I said, hey, they want volume, and time proved them and my prediction right, you know. Selling much more volume than those off-roaders. What also sets it apart from high-volume rivals like the SW4 and Pajero Sport, those are the main ones. This morning light here, we're recording early in the morning so we can go to the beach early with Nono. Yeah, oh, but are you waking up at 6, 7 in the morning? Well, yes, we wake up at 5, 6 in the morning because Nono makes us get up at that time, but we also need to watch the Chinese Grand Prix, which was today. We got up at 4 a.m. But the other difference, the powertrain, right? Here we have a hybrid powertrain, a turbocharged 2-liter combustion engine combined with 2 electric motors. That gives us 394 combined horsepower. It gives us a lot of power. It gives us 75 kilogram meters of combined torque and makes this big square box here, 4 meters 72 long and weighing 2,600 kilos. You know, if you want body-on-frame construction, if you want a differential, you're going to have weight from 0 to 100, 6.6 seconds, right? A fast car in a straight line. Even though it's not exactly the best when it comes to handling curves and dynamic behavior on the open road, which is perfectly acceptable. A G-Class isn't either, nor is a Wrangler. It's the car's profile. We're in expert off-road mode here, right? When you open the menu, you practically need a degree to work all the modes, and I don't like that, you know? I want to change the mode here. And then it asked me to switch the 4-wheel drive setting first, right? I wish that when I change the mode, it would automatically change the traction, you know? Let's put it in 4-wheel drive high, and then let's see what it lets me change here. We're in expert mode, so we have to take it out of expert mode, right? Then it goes back to the standard mode, which is recommended for asphalt conditions. And then I think it allows me, no, it still doesn't let me change the mode here without adjusting the traction first. So let's stay here and just look at the amount of information it gives you for off-road, right? A lot of people say, oh, the lens is smudged. That's not it. That smudgy look on the lens is called glare, guys, when sunlight comes in like this, especially when the sun is lower. Do you know where this happens a lot? When we record in California, right, where at higher latitudes you have lower angles of sunlight. Here in Brazil, usually to get low light like this, you need to be working pretty early. Yeah, and then this phenomenon called glare happens, where the lens does that thing. You can see the big buttons here. Buttons, right, for things like air conditioning. Here's the mode, right, pretty cool analog clock. Yeah, there are some things that are kind of hard to explain, right? In a car in this price and technology range, for example, when you're about to leave, you put it in drive and the electronic parking brake stays engaged. You have to manually do it here so the drivetrain doesn't fight itself. The cameras, which I'll show you while driving as well, the cameras and the sound signals, they're also usually excessively loud, which is often an issue with GWM. Another little peculiarity, right? I think the launch color of the car here is much cooler. If I were to get a Tank 300, I'd definitely go for the orange one, but it's a bit, in quotes, lazy, right? To have the car in the icon here, right? Both for the ADAS and, for example, here for the features. Yeah, I don't want to see this camera, I want to see the car. Tire pressure here, the orange car on the screen, even though the actual car is gray on the outside. But that's easy to fix, you just have to buy the orange one. The fact is, it's a great product. I think it's a great product. The key here, Tank is a sub-brand of GWM. That's why this one is the Tank 300, right? Just like Haval is a brand, Haval H6 Tank 300. We're going to have more products from the Tank line arriving soon. But after living with it here for a week in real life, it's very easy to understand why this car, within this niche, right? We're talking about a true off-roader with a lot of capability, with a significant entry price. It's much cheaper, right, proportionally than an SW4 or a Pajero Sport. But these cars, as I said, they also have the appeal of two appeals that this car here still doesn't have, right? One that it will never have, which is the space issue, right? A 7-seater and all. Like I said, this one is more for adventurers. A couple with a small child, like in my case, right? Even though I'm a bit crazy about space, I say, whoever has a small child and a big dog needs a lot of space, needs a Toyota Sequoia. But, so, the Tank doesn't sell to this space-seeking consumer and doesn't sell to the consumer from remote areas, right? There are a lot of SW4 consumers who are those guys from the countryside of Mato Grosso who want a lot of reliability and need a dealership relatively close by, right? And GWM's network is still much smaller than Toyota's in that regard, right? So considering that, the fact that this car sells as much as it does is really impressive. And as I was saying, after spending a week with it, taking a drive towards the coast, you quickly understand what makes the GWM Tank 300, it's no exaggeration to say, a sales phenomenon within the reality of this segment, right? When you think that this car alone sells more than the entire Land Rover lineup, which is still worldwide synonymous with off-road in Brazil. In Brazil, it's also a symbol of status, right? It's really quite impressive. Let's show you a bit of the merits and also the flaws, because on the internet you have to say something bad, otherwise people think you're being paid off while driving. Let's go. But after all, how does it drive, Congressman? Let's go. Let's really show it in the real world, starting from inside our condo in Guaratuba. First thing, I didn't use the turn signal. I'm not close to anything. A ton of cameras, which of course are very useful off-road, right? But like Gabriel Pensador would say, sea breeze, feel the sea breeze. This leads to something annoying for me. I turn on the signal and then wonder, where do I go now? I don't know. A lot of cars have this, right? But it's more common with Chinese cars. I remember when I had a Honda Civic Si, the 10th gen one, you know, the one that doesn't flex. Yeah. That used to happen a lot, right, with that side mirror camera. So, for example, you're here in these condos with lots of little streets, lots of, which exit from the roundabout am I supposed to take here? I don't know. So those are those Chinese idiosyncrasies that are a bit annoying to deal with, right? Since we're here, it's warning us about low tire pressure, but I think it's more because of the temperature here. I'm not feeling anything wrong. I even started inside the condo for you guys. Yeah, look, it already made a plop because here the speed limit is 20 per hour and I went over 20 per hour. So living with the GWM means dealing with a lot of little noises, which I think you'll get used to over time. But the fact is that most of them you can actually turn off, right, from the deactivate, but then they come back. I took advantage of having removed the warning here. Low tire pressure, that doesn't exist. Notice how many times the camera kicks in there. And the fuel consumption, look how interesting, it's an average of 13.6, right? Of course. For example, now on our way back to Sao Paulo, where another bloop. Every time it drops below 20, it goes back to 20. We'll be right at the end. Look, there's only 5 kilometers of battery left. And then when it's running only on the combustion engine, of course, the fuel consumption will go up a bit. But yeah, there's a lot of real world conditions here, right? And we came all the way down here. Then, when you think that a 4-wheel drive with almost 400 horsepower, more than 70 kilogram meters of torque, weighing 2,600 kilos, is giving you 13.6 kilometers per liter, almost 14. It's impressive, right? And it really helps to understand the reason for its success, right? One of the reasons for its success, really in many ways within this segment, look how annoying this is. It's a technological leap, right? And I also took advantage of this little start here inside the gated community, which is full of ditches and speed bumps. I don't understand who you come to live here and then you do this to yourself, right? I think it's just wild. People who actually the community could, look, we could have a speed bump and a ditch every 80 meters. It doesn't have to be every 20, right? We, the residents, will benefit from a life that's a little less hellish. But anyway, I think that in Brazil, people don't trust that there won't be speeding inside a gated community unless you put a ditch and a speed bump every 20 meters. Having had my first tantrum, now we're going to invoke Roberto Carlos, unregistered. Is everything okay? I registered, man, at the entrance, but... Thank you. And that's another thing that drives me crazy about gated communities. That's it. I'd never live in a gated community, okay? I'm just at an Airbnb for the weekend because Guaratuba is great for kids. There are gated communities here with beachfront houses, with a wide stretch of beach that you can enjoy. But one of the things I refuse to have in my life is bureaucracy just to get in and out of my own house. That's why I live in a regular house and not in a gated community. I'm terrified of condos. You know what scares me even more? It's when you go visit someone in one of those gated communities and then you, as a visitor, have to wait in line. There are 4 people ahead and it takes 20 minutes for ID, documents, and verification. You just stand there for 20 minutes. If the whole point of the gated community is security, there's nothing more dangerous than leaving people standing outside for 20 minutes. But anyway, that's my rant, as they say in English. And now I'm going to invoke Roberto Carlos, right? If you want to know who I am, I'm just going to go over this speed bump here. Look. Power. It's interesting, isn't it? Even though the aerodynamics aren't the most spectacular thing in the world, although if you compare it to a Wrangler, a G-Class, the Tank 300, honestly, is like a Formula One car cutting through the wind. The Wrangler is a car, for example, that struggles to maintain 130, 140. Not because of a lack of power, but the wind noise is really loud here, even with this straight windshield. I can make you get to know me on the road to Santos and think that I don't even like myself and that at my age, only speed still rides alongside me like the king because really it's more aerodynamic, right? Once you pass 130 or 40, you're approaching 150. The car can handle it, but wind noise becomes very loud. Another thing is when you get to these higher speeds, right? You definitely start to notice, look at this. I think this stretch here is really cool. Go straight, I'll show you. The moment when the Rio Santos splits right here, look. They preserved the big purple one in the middle. Yeah, but it's really cool. Or rather, what's even cooler is the Rio Santos stretch. What I've been saying is that, let's head down, it's really powerful, right? For what? If you're used to it, right, in this segment. Yeah, but starting to get into cruising speed here, look, the steering feels kind of vague, right? The locking differential, the 2 differentials in the back, actually underneath, it's that feeling of the chassis kind of disconnected from the body. Nothing serious, but like when you're at cruising speeds, Yeah. There's no doubt you're in a car, a genuine off-road vehicle, let's put it that way, right? A heavy car, a car that wasn't made for high cruising speeds on the highway. But even in this context, yeah, what's important to point out? It's much friendlier in this condition than a Wrangler or a Troller, right? If you stop to think about it, people have gotten used to sacrificing road comfort for a lot of off-road capability. And I'll say more when it comes to stamina, right? It's a better road companion than an SW4, better than a Pajero Sport, which, as I said at the beginning of the video, are also these SUVs, even though they're 7-seaters with much more interior space than the tank, right? But because they're body-on-frame SUVs, because they're SUVs with a lot of off-road capability, GWM considered them and presented them as competitors at the launch of the Tank 300. Yeah, the Tank 300, even with its much less aerodynamic profile compared to those guys, is a better highway companion than an SW4 or a Pajero Sport. And as for a Wrangler, it's not even worth mentioning, right? Yeah, and then we start to understand, right, the real world equation that makes this guy sell as much as it does within this niche, right? We're talking about, let's make a little mess here. It's going to be the maximum amount of curves. The curves of the Estrada de Santos from King Roberto are further ahead. Here you can only see the straight parts of the Estrada de Santos. By the way, look it up on YouTube. One of the most truly Brazilian things from the 90s that you can watch, which is the attempt at a record. Actually, not an attempt, but the achievement of the Brazilian speed record. With the stock car, Fabinho Sotomayor and Opalone there, I think it was in 91, they closed off a stretch of the Rio Santos so the guy could hit 315 in a big Opala. It's the shirtless mechanics, that wonderful 90s Brazil, and a record that is... I later helped break that record with Red Bull, taking the stock car to Bonneville and reaching 346 kilometers per hour. We did it, right? That record by Fabinho Sotomayor with the Opalão lasted from 91 to 2006. It lasted quite a long time. Actually, in 2009, we did it here. But anyway, let's move on, right? Yeah, FIFA soccer boxes, right? The car delivers the off-road look, which is important. The car offers a high level of fit and finish. The car provides interesting fuel efficiency, interesting performance, and it's easy to live with on the highway, right? Which many in this segment don't deliver, right? Because in the end, no matter how much of an off-road enthusiast you are, you'll end up spending most of your time, even on the way to the trails, on the pavement, right? No matter how, much heavy off-road use you put it through, right? Even the most hardcore off-roader spends more time on the pavement than on dirt. Yeah. And the tank delivers a lot, right? The tank spider chart is really very competitive, very strong, right? Yeah, I just think that where the big Achilles heel is, here, a little 60 profile tire. It's really the interior space. More than the interior space, it's the trunk compared to the external size of the car, right? It's a big car, over 4.7 meters long, but it's that old story. You can't have everything, right? Yeah, to have an SUV with a strong chassis with 2 locking differentials and a hybrid battery so you can get that kind of range, 700 kilometers, fuel consumption above 13. As they say in Rio Grande do Sul, you can't fit Porto Alegre inside Bagé, right? You can't have it all, yeah. So you end up having to make that compromise, but it's a compromise that, I would easily, if I lived more in rural areas, you know, because I think the range is appealing. One thing that sets it apart, which I think is in practice its main real world competitor to the tank, is the Bronco Sport, which also has really good performance. It has a bigger trunk. It's more compact in size and has a significantly lower cost, right? I think the Bronco Sport's overall profile is even stronger. Yeah, and I also think the aesthetics of the Bronco Sport are much better, right? It doesn't have that Lada-like front end the GWM tank has. But that being said, of course here, for example, we have more technology, better fit and finish, more off-road capability, right? Fuel consumption. Anyway, the car delivers a lot too. I think the Tank 300 is an excellent buy. It's I would say within the Chinese verse, it's one of the purchases I endorse the most. If someone says, hey, I'm thinking about getting a Tank 300, I say, man, go for it. It's a great product. Power. We don't have any driving modes focused on sportiness, right? Here we only have the normal mode and the expert mode, right? Which, since I'm above 75 per hour, it doesn't show. It's basically a mode where you can customize pretty much everything, but really a beautiful product. In this specific niche, I would go with the Bronco Sport. But if you want the hybrid, for example, so you don't have to deal with the driving restrictions in Sao Paulo, want more performance, and are willing to spend a little more, what a great vehicle the GWM Tank 300 is. Maybe the best of the GWM lineup for me in Brazil today. I would just add one caveat. I would go for the big orange one, which I think looks really cool. And you tell us in the comments, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. That always helps us a lot. And as always, thank you so much. Take good care of yourself. All the best. And now let's go through the epic saga of entering the condo again and enjoy a day at the beach with Roberta, Nono, and our friends. Thanks a lot. Let's see if it works now. Thanks. Now the facial recognition worked. Funny, right? It lets me in, but it won't let me out. Man, you can forbid me from entering your private property, but not from leaving, right? That's called house arrest, isn't it? What's that called? False imprisonment, false imprisonment. Thanks a lot.